So I don't have my jersey on.
I quickly counted down to 7, but I think we're live. Hello, everyone. It's been about a year of doing Zoom presentations, and it's still no less awkward to wonder if anyone is actually listening on the other end. So hopefully someone is there. And if not, it's just a chat with me and my 5 friends here. My name is Brandon Holterman. I work for a company called 7 Generations Energy. We are a natural gas and gas liquid producer in Northwest Alberta, centered in the kind of Grand Prairie region. I am part of our sustainability team, and I am here to discuss a really unique initiative that we undertook over the past 3 years. 2 years in development, and we've been 1 year in execution. I am here with my 5 closest friends in the past year, I would say, to give their perspectives and to give you a holistic view on this initiative. I will only be talking for about 5 more minutes, and then you'll get to talk to all of them because they are smarter and they understand this better than I do. So I'll start with a high-level overview, and then I'm just going to leave you with kind of, 3 thoughts to percolate while the rest of my team and partners give a presentation. So I will try and get this into presentation mode here. And again, since I don't know what's happening, I hope it works. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. So what we're here to discuss with you today is something that we refer to as the responsible procurement of natural gas. So at a very high level, what is this? So this is about a company, 7Gen, who produces natural gas and natural gas liquids, selling gas to our partner, Enerigr, which is a Quebec-based utility that delivers said natural gas to homes and industries in Quebec. And 2 other organizations, Equitable Origin and the Pembina Institute, which one you're probably familiar with and one you might not be so familiar with, but you will be after this presentation. And those 2 parties collectively providing a verification of the 7G production, that this is done in a responsible way. So at a very high level, that's what it's about. We're going to get into the details of kind of what that looked like, what that verification involved, how the collaboration came together. But before I pass off to my partners here, I just want to leave you with kind of 3 thoughts to think about this initiative. And the first thought is, when we often talk about sustainability and ESG, things like new technologies and innovative ways to reduce emissions usually capture all the attention, and they get all, these things are sexy, everyone gets to invent something, it's really cool. That's not entirely what this initiative is about. I think this initiative shows the other side of ESG and sustainability, and how it's not always about the technology. Sometimes it's about the policies and the business arrangements that can help fuel that technology and move towards those objectives. And the biggest part of that is the second thing I would leave you to consider out. This is about 4 organizations with slightly different objectives, purposes, goals, coming together in a spirit of collaboration and co-development to address a challenging issue. It wasn't easy with these 4 organizations in the room. There was some really tough discussions. There was some compromise from every party, kind of pushing their agenda. But at the end of the day, everyone came into the room trying to solve a problem and working towards a mutually beneficial outcome. And in the end, we came up with something that was the first of its kind in Canada, and something that I think is really cool, and potentially and the future of energy development, in my opinion. And third, I just leave you with, we announced this almost exactly a year ago, And it took 2 years to develop this program. And this collaboration between 4 organizations that normally don't come out in the same sentence all that often, a Quebec distributor, an Alberta natural gas producer, an environmental organization from Alberta, and a verifier and certifier from headquartered in the US, came together at a time when political discourse, when conversations around climate change were, I would say, confrontational at best, and kind of rose above that discourse and came out with a tangible solution to a problem that everyone typically just argues about and points the finger. And this isn't about pointing the finger. This is about working together with your supply chain, with your stakeholders, with your partners, and coming up with something that's unique, creative, and pushes the conversation forward in a really positive way. So I just think about those things when we're talking and when you're hearing the presentations. And I am going to stop talking now because I'm sure you've heard enough. And I am going to pass it over to my friend Philippe, who's going to talk about the Enerigr side of this story.
Great. Thanks, Brandon, for that introduction, and I'm happy to share with you all, you know, where we're coming at this from Enerigr. So as Brandon mentioned, we're the local gas distribution company in the province of Quebec. We distribute 97% of the gas that is used in Quebec. And, you know, as Brandon mentioned, this is really for us, it's been a stakeholder driven approach. So, you know, Enerigr, previously we were known as Gaz Métro. We changed names because we've got subsidiaries and diversified assets in renewable energy in different jurisdictions in Vermont, elsewhere in the United States. So, you know, we see, you know, energy, and our mission is to distribute energy, more sustainable energy to our clients and help them in their transition to a low carbon economy. So, you know, with that in mind, you know, the genesis of this project for us was really at a time when Enerigr was trying to chart out a strategic plan. This was in 2017, and at that time, my CEO at the time, Sophie Brochu, who is now the CEO of Hydro-Québec in Quebec, she engaged with some of our ENGOs in Quebec. I think one of the strengths that we've always had at Enerigr was to be able to engage with people, even though perhaps we would agree to disagree on certain things. And, you know, one of the things that kept coming up for us in our discussions and engagement with our stakeholders was trying to get a better understanding of our value chain. And so this is what this initiative is about. It was about us embarking on a process whereby we were able to bring credible information to our stakeholders. So yes, actually you can jump to that one, Brandon, thanks. And in parallel to the work that we were doing on this initiative with the different groups that Brandon presented, we also started doing some life cycle work. And for us, it was important to be able to have a full and you know, a science-based view of our value chain and also how we can address the decarbonization of this value chain. So, you know, in essence, we've been managing our GHG emissions at a corporate level and our operational perspective for some time now. We've got a certified, you know, management system to do that. But you know, we knew that there were emissions that we needed to address downstream, which is, you know, our clients using the natural gas for their heating, for their industrial purposes, and also upstream. And so we wanted to be able to bring meaningful information to our stakeholders who were asking us more questions about where the gas was coming from that we were distributing and how it was produced. So this has been, as Brandon mentioned, a concerted effort over the last, for us, you know, a couple of years, 2 or 3 years for sure, to be able to engage on this front. And next slide, please. And so I mentioned that this was a stakeholder-driven process. You know, for us as a local distribution company, we were very much accustomed to the business of distributing gas. We take, you know, we get the gas distributed to us in franchise in Quebec, and then we do the rest of the job to bring it to our customers. But where is this gas produced? How is it produced? These are tough questions that we weren't able to answer. And so it was really about educating ourselves, reaching out to a lot of producers, and also reaching out to the Pembina Institute. You know, we started working with the Pembina Institute really early on in this process because, as I mentioned, we engaged with our ENGO counterparts and groups here in Quebec, and they wanted us to be able to work on this issue by identifying the key issues that on an ESG standpoint, on the environmental governance and social side, were occurring upstream at the production level. So this is something we looked at with Pembina, who was really instrumental in helping us look at, you know, the different issues in production practices, looking also at the different certification processes or frameworks that existed at that time. And then we were able to get into a process to test this out. We wanted to see what kind of information could be developed out of this. And this is, I think, what Brandon alluded to. This is what took so long, because we needed to try to get on the same page with an ENGO, with a distributor, with a producer, and make sure that there was something in it for all of us in this process. I think learning was a key driver for all parties, and was really what made it important for all of us to get into this process. So we did a pilot project wherein we were able to look at the Equitable Origin process. So the Equitable Origin standard, I will let Heather present, you know, how it's structured. But for us, it was clearly identified with Pembina, and also in engaging with our stakeholders as the most broad and complete standard that was looking at a breadth of ESG issues. And so for us, this is what we wanted to test out, and this is what we did end up going through with this pilot project. Ultimately, this for us was a success, and this pilot project, and it we then asked to work with Pembina to see how we could structure an approach that we could file with our regulator in Quebec. So in the winter of 2019, we were able to do this. And what this, in essence, allowed us to do at Enerigr was actually, so two things: able to get into, you know, transactions with producers, specific producers, whereas in the past, Enerigr was working with a lot of marketers and brokers in the energy space. So that was one thing. And the other thing is also to be able to pay a premium for the gas that is purchased through producers that have undergone this process. Next slide, please. And so, you know, as we structured this to be able to, you know, answer our local stakeholders' needs, and also our regulator, we highlighted that this initiative has two goals, two specific aims: is to be able to buy from specific producers, but also buy from producers that are willing and able to make you know, their performance through a third-party credible certification public, and be able to make information accessible in a transparent manner. So this is really what we're trying to get to, is getting more information to be able to inform our procurement practices. And as Brandon mentioned, perhaps this isn't like the type of innovation that you see, you know, with regards to technology. Actually, you know, this is applying responsible procurement practices, but to the natural gas industry. This has been done in other value chains and other industries, and we felt it was time for us to bring it to, you know, the gas that we were purchasing and distributing to our customers. Next slide, please. So, you know, for us to structure what the eligibility process is for a producer is, we're asking for there to be a certification, again, Heather and will be able to talk to this process. We also ask for key performance indicators. So, forward-thinking producers, responsible producers, they will already have sustainability reporting practices, and we want to be able to capitalize on what they're already collecting as far as ESG information is concerned, and be able to make that available to our stakeholders. So that is a separate part of the process. But once we have those two steps, the certification and the performance indicators, we're then able to present the producer as being eligible to our process, and then we're able to enter into agreements for gas purchasing. Next slide, please. And we're not alone in this space, in that we are actually part of this initiative in North America called the Natural Gas Supply Collaborative, so which regroups different natural gas distributors and power providers in the US mainly. It's equivalent to 13% of the marketed natural gas in the US that all these groups are purchasing. So, and together we've joined in trying to ask for greater transparency, and also try to streamline the demands that we have with regards to producers, in that there are key performance indicators that we feel producers should be able to be making available, so that as gas purchasers and distribution companies, we're able to make informed decisions, but also be able to bring meaningful information to our stakeholders with regards to where this gas is coming from. So this is by no means just an isolated Enerigr and Quebec thing. This is actually a continental initiative that we've brought our own specific angle to. Next slide. And recently we published our first climate resiliency report, and in that we've highlighted and we've identified different climate metrics and targets. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got a life cycle approach, and it was important for us to be able to address, obviously, the key part is the emissions that are generated from the use of natural gas in Quebec, but there are emissions all across the value chain, and this is the climate report. So we're really looking at GHGs here, but we have included a new target for us with regards to this initiative, and we're really happy and proud to be able to do so. So our target is that by 2030, we would want for 100% of the gas that Enerigr is purchasing be done through our initiative. So we want to make the statement in 2020, last year, 15% of our network gas, which is a part of the gas that we're distributing, was made through this initiative. And obviously, we want to ramp this up. We want other distributors to join the fray, and also other producers to follow Seven Generations' lead in making the case for transparency. So this is a key part of how we see our contribution to the energy transition in Quebec, but also in our industry. Next slide. And that's really, as I mentioned, our next steps for us is really broadening the circle of distributors and producers that can be involved in this, and we have signals that are really encouraging on that point, and I'll let my colleagues join in to talk about that. So thanks for your time, and obviously open to sharing a bit more with you in the questions period.
Thanks, Philippe. My name is Jan Gorski. I am with the Pembina Institute, which is a nonprofit think tank working on climate policy to support Canada's clean energy transition. And we can go to the next slide, Brandon. And before I jump into our role in this program and what we see as the future of certification in relation to Canada's energy transition, I'll give you a bit of a background on the Pembina Institute for those that haven't heard. And we can go to the next slide, please. So that photo was actually the lodgepole blowout in the 1980s, which was part of how Pembina came to be. So Pembina, we're a nonprofit think tank, as I mentioned. We work across Canada, but we were actually founded in the 1980s in Alberta. And we have a history of working with the energy sector on responsible resource development. We combine technical expertise, relationships with the energy sector, as well as an ability to bring together diverse stakeholders, such as the groups that you see here today, to solve some of the issues that face us. And we can go to the next slide. So we really envision a world where we use energy in a way that supports low carbon electricity, that creates a transport system that also minimizes emissions, as well as homes and buildings that also don't emit carbon. And we work to create an energy system that recognizes that there's a shifting role for fossil fuels. But also we understand that there's a need to build a competitive economy. So this gives you a sense of some of the broad issues that the Pembina Institute works on across Canada. And we can go to the next slide. So as Philippe mentioned, this really started in 2017 when Enerigr approached us to help them understand some of the environmental and social impacts of natural gas development. And the first step was really the production of this report to dig into the details of what are these impacts in Alberta. We followed this up by engaging with Enerigr stakeholders to try and understand their concerns in relations to natural gas development. And the outcome of this was that we recommended that Enerigr pursue a certification framework to address some of these concerns that arose. And as Philippe mentioned, we recommended the Equitable Origin standard because it covers a broad range of environmental, social, and governance issues. And I won't go into too much detail on that. I'll save that for Heather, who will tell you about the EO standard. So once this framework was chosen, we kind of stepped back a little bit and we acted as an observer through this pilot project back in 2018. And following that, we really worked to provide Enerigr with the right recommendations on how to design the responsible gas procurement program. And one thing to keep in mind is that a priority goal throughout this whole process to ensure that the concerns of Enerigr stakeholders were really at top of mind in every step of the project. And we can go to the next slide. And so here we have some of the concerns that came up, and they're quite broad, from climate issues in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, methane, well liabilities and well abandonment, the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples, land impacts, the role that gas producers and energy developers have in the transition to low carbon economy, and their influence on environmental policy. And out of these, there were three issues that were prioritized. And these were climate change, governance, and the concerns of Indigenous peoples. And as I mentioned, one of our main goals throughout this process was to ensure that the concerns of Enerigr stakeholders were really prioritized as we kept going through this. And so throughout each step of this process, we actually had touch point with Enerigr stakeholders to ensure that they were informed and kept in the loop in terms of what was going on in the process and that their concerns were heard. And we can go to the next slide. So now that the first step of this project is complete, I'll share some of our perspective on certification and what we see as really as the role of gas. So we know that the world needs to transition to less carbon intensive sources of energy. And for Canada to achieve its 2030 climate targets and its 2050 net zero goal, we're going to have to increase our use of cleaner sources of energy, and we're going to have to reduce our use of more carbon intensive sources. And I think it's become quite clear in the past few years that investors are really looking for strong environmental and social performance from the companies that they are investing in. And so what this means is that this will really be a competitive advantage for these companies in the market. And this program really fits well into this. In this case, it wasn't so much driven by investors, it was driven by consumers, but nonetheless, it really shows where the puck is going, to use a hockey metaphor for Brandon Philippe. And the certification program really supports this goal of achieving better climate and environmental outcomes to drive more responsible energy development. So the next step that we really see is to grow interest in certification, both from producers and end users, to try and achieve achieve better outcomes on environmental and social performance, and understanding that certification is complementary to other policies that we see out there, such as carbon pricing and the Clean Fuel Standard. And it really allows producers to stay ahead of the curve and stay competitive as the energy system evolves and changes. And that is what I have. I will pass it on to, I believe, Heather's next, and look forward to answering some questions as they come up.
Thanks, Jan. Yes, hi everyone. I'm Heather Jones. I'm the Program Manager for Equitable Origin Certified Responsible Natural Gas Program. And thanks for having me. So today I'd like to just give a brief overview of our standard and some of the benefits along the value chain. Next slide. Equitable Origin is a nonprofit organization incorporated in the United States. It was founded in 2009 with roots in helping the indigenous peoples of the Ecuadorian Amazon and has expanded operations throughout the Americas. Our mission is to protect people and the environment by ensuring that energy development is done under the highest social and environmental standards. Our vision is to facilitate transparent and accountable energy development that benefits all stakeholders, local communities, and the environment. We partner with business, communities, and government to support responsible energy development. In 2012, we created the world's first stakeholder-based independent voluntary standard, the EO 100 standard for responsible energy development. Through the EO 100 certification process, we recognize and reward responsible energy producers and create incentives for continuous improvement. Producers who adopt the EO 100 certification are demonstrating their leadership in achieving the highest level of environmental, social, and governance standards. Next slide. The EO 100 standard was published in 2012 after a 3-year comprehensive multi-stakeholder consultation period and was subsequently reviewed and updated in 2017. In addition to the standard, there are several technical addenda that are published for different types of energy. Relating to oil and gas, there are 2 published addenda that are meant to be used together with the overall standard. We have onshore oil and gas and the shale oil and gas addenda. Within the EO 100 standard, there are 5 principles. The first is corporate governance, transparency, and ethics. The second is stakeholder engagement, human rights, and community investment. The third is indigenous people's rights. Fourth, occupational health, safety, and fair labor. And the 5th is climate change, biodiversity, and the environment. Can click that again, thanks. Under the principles, there are combined 46 objectives, and under these objectives, we have a number of performance targets. Click that one more time, thanks. So there are 3 levels of performance targets that a site can meet. The performance target level 1 indicates that a site is meeting industry best practices. Performance target level 2 indicates that a site is exceeding industry best practices, and performance target level 3 indicates that a site is leading in industry best practices. Next slide. So why certified responsible natural gas? There are many benefits to many stakeholders along the value chain. Producers who adopt the standard will gain early market entry for their certified product, independent and credible validation of their ESG practices. Recognition of their responsible practices can then attract a premium price for the product and responsible investors. Through relationship building between producers and downstream natural gas purchasers, Equitable Origin can help coordinate and introduce buyers seeking responsible natural gas in their procurement programs. We also have a partnership with an organization that facilitates transactions on a digital marketing platform, should producers be interested in using that route for marketing their responsibly sourced natural gas. Purchasers of the responsible natural gas demonstrate their responsible procurement practices, lower their carbon intensity of their distributed product, and can be ensured that their suppliers are responsive to environmental and local community concerns. Investors can understand the full scope of ESG risks and impacts associated with the products they're supporting with independently verified ESG data. Next slide. So try to put it into kind of a fun format here. So we see a lot of potential opportunities for certified responsible natural gas, from distributors looking to purchase responsibly sourced natural gas to benefit their customers like Enerigr and Vermont Gas, to industrial users wanting to trace their impacts upstream of the main production facilities and report on Scope 3 emissions. The trend toward net zero GHG emissions is also developing interest in other areas around decarbonization and added benefits when exploring credits that may be achievable with lower value chain carbon footprints. Examples include blue hydrogen production, where lowering upstream natural gas carbon intensity makes hydrogen produced much closer to zero carbon intensity overall. And when you look at the impacts of the upstream, it can be upwards of 50% of the life cycle of the carbon intensity of the blue hydrogen. So quite significant. There are also fuel switching opportunities to reduce diesel fuel consumption and switch to cleaner burning natural gas or hydrogen fueled transport trucks. Power generation in Alberta is trending towards coal phase out, replacing it with natural gas power generation. And knowing the upstream impacts associated with power generators, natural gas supply is becoming of increasing interest. LNG importers are becoming increasingly aware of where their natural gas supply is originating. For instance, there was an announcement last year from a large European energy company that they were halting all imports of natural gas from a long-term contract with a US LNG exporter, primarily over concerns with methane emissions associated with the upstream natural gas supply. There is also a growing LNG industry in Canada, and it can be expected that similar instances of downstream consumers or importers of the Canadian LNG will also be requiring environmental and social accountability. Next slide. So thank you. At Equitable Origin, we're very excited in the increased interest in the certified responsible natural gas this year. We actually have an additional 6 Canadian producers starting the certification process, so that's really exciting. We also have interest from a number of US producers as well, so it looks like it's going to be a pretty exciting year for us. And thanks, everybody. I'll pass it on to Marie now.
Thank you, Heather, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marie Jurcevic. I'm the Manager of Sustainability at 7 Generations Energy. I'm the other half of the sustainability team that Brandon referenced. I have the privilege of working with him and others at our organization committed to advancing our commitment to social and environmental responsibility. For my portion of today's presentation, I'll focus on our certification journey, what that entailed, and I'll walk you through the stages that Heather shared from the perspective of a company going through the certification process. And then we'll spend some time talking about the benefits of pursuing certification. And we're going to end it off by giving you an example of what we were able to achieve through our sustainability fund, which is what we used our premium for. I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end and likely turn it over to my colleague, Brandon. So 7 Generations Energy, for those of you who don't know us, we take a principled approach to development. As a sustainability practitioner, one of the reasons I wanted to work for the organization is I think that being founded on sustainability principles is from a business perspective, really innovative, and I think a direction a lot of organizations are going. So for me, it aligned with my values, and I saw this as a great opportunity to be a part of that process and that journey, to work for an organization who really sees the value in sustainability and stakeholder service. The company, as I said, was founded on sustainability principles, and it's based on an Indigenous concept that urges us to think about what we do as a current generation and the impact of that 7 generations into the future. So I guess you can say we were built for this partnership, built for this initiative. So we were really glad to be a part of it. And we think that there's a societal need for energy, and we think that that energy should be responsibly developed. The certification is aligned with 7G's commitment to differentiated stakeholder service and responsible development. And we think that it's done in a transparent way through this process, and it considers the needs of all stakeholders, including Indigenous communities. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I'm going to spend a fair bit of time walking you through the process in terms of what is entailed in the certification. As it had been alluded to or referenced throughout today's presentations, this process started 3 years ago, and there's been a lot of work put into developing the program. I'll focus primarily over the last 2 years from when we received our certification. So in fall of 2019, we went through the certification process. And the certification process is very rigorous, as I'm sure you saw when Heather went through her presentation. For those of you in the audience who are familiar with completing ESG questionnaires, the first part of certification entails completing a self-assessment. It's very similar to what you would go through when you complete an ESG questionnaire, whereby you're asked to respond to your practices in various environment, social, and governance metrics to determine what your policies, processes, and procedures are. And then once that's complete, there's a site visit, and that's done by independent auditors. They go to our site and they talk to operators and various 7G employees at those sites to understand our processes and how we do business. And then there's also a step that requires interviews with our stakeholders. And those stakeholders are impacted by our business, whether it be local community in Grand Prairie or Indigenous peoples. And those conversations and interviews with those stakeholders take place independent of 7G. And by that, I mean, we're not a part of those conversations. So stakeholders are free to speak to how they think we're doing and whether we are walking the talk on our commitment to sustainability. In addition to that, there are conversations that are held with the various subject matter experts across our organization who are responsible for the various business functions such as health and safety, supply chain, HR, environment, etc. And following those conversations, then as well as the self-assessment and the interviews that I mentioned, then an assessment is completed on our performance, and that goes through a third-party review as well. So I want to outline and emphasize that process because I think it's important for you to know how rigorous the process is. I have been a sustainability practitioner for my entire career, and I've had the benefit of being involved in reporting and disclosure as a big part of the work that I do. But I would say what this initiative does is it takes you beyond disclosure, and transparency is important, but it takes it to another level because it allows you to assess performance. And you're not only hearing from the company and the organization, but you're also hearing from our stakeholders, and they can attest to whether they think that we are walking the talk or living up to our values. We received certification in November 2019, so we've had certification now for well over a year. And then in the winter of 2020, we announced our first responsible natural gas supply deal with Enerigr, as Brandon had mentioned earlier. Following that, there were numerous webinars that were held with Enerigr, Equitable Origin, Pembina Institute to promote the initiative. And then we participated in a number of podcasts, webinars, attended events, meetings, and events like this. And the purpose being is we want to create a movement and let people know about this initiative. And I think we've done that throughout our time. I know all of us within our various stakeholder groups have had the opportunity to present this initiative, and there is a lot of interest in this. And so it's great to see that I think that we are creating a movement. And there are a lot of individuals interested in what we've done. As Heather pointed out, there are other companies going through the certification, but we had the honor of being the first to be involved in that process. In the fall of 2020, we announced the second responsible natural gas supply deal, and that was with Vermont Gas. And in addition, we also completed the first year assessment with Equitable Origin. A main component of the certification is a commitment to continuous improvement. And part of that involves us developing a continuous improvement plan, whereby we address some of the gaps that were identified in the certification and outline how we are committed to addressing those gaps. And this year, this past year, when we completed that year one assessment, the auditors had the opportunity to meet with stakeholders internally who are responsible for these business functions. And we had the opportunity to walk them through the advancements that we had made since our certification. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of participation? You've heard quite a few of them from my colleagues. Again, increased demand for responsibly produced natural gas, the positive interprovincial energy cooperation, increased market access, increased transparency. And I said that that is an important piece because there are requirements, as Philippe had mentioned, for us, in addition to what we publish in our ESG disclosures, to disclose on additional metrics. So definitely there's value in that. And if anything, I think the other benefits of this include replicability. There are other companies that are interested in pursuing certification. And as I said, although we are the first to receive the certification, there's interest from our peers. I've spent a lot of time and have had conversations with other companies who are interested in pursuing certifications. And as you said, as Heather said, it looks like there are a number of companies speaking to Equitable Origin to pursue this. And the last piece that I'll talk about is the creation of the Sustainability Fund. Next slide, please, Brandon. I'll turn this over to Brandon, but we'll just say a few things before I pass it off. As part of our deal with Enerigr, we received a modest premium for our natural gas. And what we did at 7G is we created a sustainability fund from that premium. And I will let Brandon talk about an initiative, which is hot off the press. This was actually just announced yesterday. So you're actually the first group to hear about it in detail in terms of what that project looks like. And as I said, I'll turn it over to Brandon, as this is his baby and an initiative that he led. So he'll be better able to speak about it more eloquently than I will. So I'll pass it off to Brandon.
I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that, but I'm happy to support my teammate out in discussing this. So like Marie said, one of the really cool things about this initiative, I think from the 7G side, was that instead of taking the modest premium from the gas and rolling it into our corporate budget or expenditures, we as a company decided that, you know, we're getting this premium because of our ESG practices, and that premium should be reinvested in ensuring the continued performance on those ESG practices. So super excited to announce, right around year 1 too, which is perfect, the first investment out of our sustainability fund. And that is that we entered into an agreement with a company called Sustainatech, who designs and builds modular controlled environment agricultural farms, otherwise just, I think, easily known as a vertical farm. But basically what this is it's about 260 plus sea cans. And they're going to bring those sea cans, they're going to put them near one of our gas plants in Grand Prairie. They are going to connect to that gas plant where we will take the waste heat from that facility as well as some electricity. And we will provide that to the sea cans so that they can grow herbs and produce. Really cool project, really neat, first of its kind to be done on a co-located industrial site. It has a great environmental impact on the site. About 4,800 metric tons of carbon will be saved, or sorry, 15,000 metric tons of CO2e avoided annually within the Alberta system. We'll be able to generate some carbon credits. which is also cool. But on a broader global scale, there's also a supply chain and environmental impact. Typically, these herbs, think of basil and rosemary, are imported from Israel or in the Middle East. So by growing them locally, you're cutting out a major emission sources through the supply chain and the transportation of those herbs. So really cool initiative. Hopefully the first of many to come from the Sustainability Fund. And the best part is it's a business that makes money, and that money will just be used to grow the Sustainability Fund and fund more projects like that. So a really cool initiative and something we're pretty excited to get going, and happy to use the funds from this program to do that. I'll pass it back to Marie, I think.
Excellent. Thanks, Brandon. So that wraps it up for our presentation. Happy to answer any questions, and thank you again for your interest and for joining us today.
Sorry, I have to unmute myself. So super exciting news to everyone on the call and myself is apparently there are people listening, because there are some questions that are coming in. So that's exciting. I think I'll take the role of kind of dishing these out to people on the team as they come. I will say one thing though, there is a student at the U of C who works for 7G, and if all of these questions are coming from him, I'm going to be very disappointed. I hope they're coming from someone else. Okay, we're going to start with the first one that looks like, do you have plans to perhaps work with government to make this certification ubiquitous? I guess I'll maybe start from the 7G perspective on that one. Yeah, I mean, again, as Marie said, we have 7 key stakeholders. One of those key stakeholders is government. And before I maybe talk about that, I think one of the things that is really cool about this initiative is that this was an industry and NGO and NGO led initiative. And I think that we shouldn't lose that. Like this is industry stepping up with the help of the not-for-profit sectors to do something that isn't a requirement and that isn't being forced on them. And I don't think we should lose sight of that. That being said, we've had very positive interactions with all levels of government. Obviously, when you think of things around energy transition and different policies and programs, like Jan said, like this is one of many different complementary programs that can help us get and achieve our goals, goals like net zero or hitting those 2030 targets. And we definitely think that this can play a role in that. And we have been talking to governments in terms of how they can help and what role they might have in this, but nothing solid on that. Just again, engaging that stakeholder as an important part as well. And maybe I'll just pass it to Philippe next if he has any comments to add.
The only thing I would add to that, Brandon, which I think is really a good answer to the question of what governments can do. I think there has been interest, as you mentioned, and for us, it would be helpful if we get other distributors in other jurisdictions, other provinces to get on board, and I think the government is really has shown interest for that. They're working on other things. There's the clean fuel standards that are being developed as well. So I think this is certainly something that they're seeing as something that can complement a wide palette of policy choices that need to be implemented. So we're looking forward to continuing our discussions with them on this.
Excellent. Jan, did you want to add anything from the Pembina perspective?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate quickly that, as you said, I think governments have been fairly supportive of this program from our conversations as well. But it's important to recognize that these are almost 2 separate tracks, and that government works to enact policies such as carbon pricing and the clean fuel standard, And the role of certification is actually to stay ahead of the curve of that policy and to really push companies to go further than what's required in current regulations and current policies.
Excellent, great additions, thank you. And next up we have, are there plans to extend the certification to other similar hydrocarbon products? Excellent question, and maybe I will pass that over to Heather to take a first crack at.
Sure, thanks, Brennan. So the Equitable Origin certification, the standard is meant for all types of energy development. So it's a kind of a blanket standard, and what the vision is that there be, it could be applied to various forms of energy development. So wind, solar, like renewables, natural gas. We have a technical addendum for light oil production now, so another hydrocarbon product. We can make new technical addendums as the interest comes up. So I think there's some talk about potentially including LNG down the road and those kind of forms of energy as well. So it's been kind of on a needs basis. So far natural gas is really where we've seen the interest. So that's where we've been focused. But yes, it can be applied to many forms of energy.
Excellent. Does anyone else want? Well, we'll move on to the next one because I think that's also for Heather as well. Will the certification apply to an entire company's supply and procurement chain? And if so, how do you ensure this?
So, I mean, how we've been working so far is just with the natural gas producers. So we also have some interest from suppliers to the oil and gas to oil and gas producers. So we have some interest there. So it could actually be applied to the whole supply chain. So far, we're just taking it as it comes. So it's just producers right now. But yeah, it can be applied straight from well up through gas processing plants. We've already seen that with the 7 generations certification. So it's quite broad and it can be applied. I guess it just depends on the downstream market. So when the downstream, you I guess have to be careful with double counting of credits and whatnot, if that was what the question was referring to. But yeah, that can be sorted out with the marketing of the credit. But yeah, sorry. Hopefully that answered it.
Sounded like it did to me.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. I think probably everyone might have an opinion on this one. So it seems that a number of organizations, investment banks, firms, and energy companies have their own set of metrics for defining ESG criteria. Do you see government regulators catching up with the sustainable investors and implementing an overarching ESG standard? I know Marie's chomping at the bit for this one, so maybe we'll let her take the first crack. Then we'll go Philippe and Jan and Heather if they want.
Thanks, Brandon. As someone who spends a lot of her time actually pondering this and looking at various ESG raters and frameworks, et cetera, I would say that there actually is a consensus moving towards SASB and TCFD disclosures. But I would say that if you look at the Equitable Origin certification, it is very thoughtful and intentional and not duplicating efforts. So when we were completing our certification, a lot of the questions that are asked by the GRI, SASB, and various other ESG rating agencies were already incorporated and included as part of that process. So I do think that the certification is very thoughtful in ensuring that that's been included. The other part of the question being in terms of government regulators, and the question in terms of whether they're going to be catching up with the regulations that are out there. There seems to be some interest in having those conversations. Brandon and I have participated in conversations with regulators trying to understand not just the Equitable Origin certification, but ways that there may be the possibility of, I guess, getting some alignment in terms of ESG metrics. It's not an easy feat though, to be honest with you. There are a few different things to be considered. Part of it being duplication. There's already a lot of work that's done, so it has to be considered quite thoughtfully. But I do think that there is some growing consensus around two reporting frameworks, mainly SASB and TCFD. And as I said, I'd emphasize that the Equitable Origin framework has done a really good job of ensuring that it does align with the key reporting frameworks as well as the ESG rating organizations that many of us respond to.
Yeah, perhaps I just add to what Marie just said, which, I think there is alignment with regards to, on the climate issue, for instance, with regards to investor demand. There's the TCFD and SASB that are emerging. I think for broader ESG, which, the standard, the EO standard is able to encompass, I think what's interesting with the government, and we're seeing the federal government looking to, frame this around the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think there are obvious links with what is in the EO standard and the SDGs on other aspects that are, when you're looking at the outcomes that you're trying to develop out of all this. So I think the frameworks are there, they exist, and it's just a matter of linking, how, for instance, individual companies are able to contribute to, the SDGs in a specific area. And I think certainly the certification comes to support this in how this can be developed.
I'll focus on the second part of the question, since I think you guys both done a great job of answering the first part, which is, do government regulators, or do you see regulators catching up with these ESG standards? And I think it speaks to the previous point I made, which is that these are almost separate tracks, and really to achieve our climate goals and a lot of the other environmental objectives, we need to pursue all the different pathways available to us. And governments have their own tools, policy, and regulations, but it's also important to have this complementary track, which is market-driven mechanisms, such as these kinds of ESG standards. And the more pieces we have working in parallel, I think it increases our odds of success.
All right. I'm going to try and sneak in one last question because I think it's a cool question. And we'll start with Philippe, I think, on this one. This kind of integrated initiative seems to be directed at supply chains are going now. How can consumers support initiatives like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. For us, we've designed this, or we've, really wanted to be able to provide more information to the customers themselves. And now, for instance, you're able on our website to get more information on, 7 Generations EO certification process on their KPI. So I think as a customer, it's important to show that you're interested in these and this kind of information, getting this kind of transparency. So asking, your distribution company, where, they're getting their energy. We're talking about energy here, but it can apply to, all types of, purchasing decisions that we're making. Where are you, where are you investing your hard-earned money? What are you encouraging? And I think it's important to get information and for that information to be, structured in a way that it's credible. And I think that's certainly what we've tried to achieve here. So I'd say for customers is really to try to ask their companies they're working with what kind of options exist for responsible purchasing.
We got 1 minute, I think. Anyone else want to jump on that one before we wrap up?
I was just going to add as well, I think that energy literacy piece is important. A lot of us, myself included, spend time understanding where our food comes from. There are people that are interested in purchasing local, organic, etc. And I think sometimes energy is taken for granted and we don't ask questions or think about how it's produced or where it comes from. So I think there's an important component to awareness and education and energy literacy starting with students, children, et cetera, and all of us as adults as well. I think that's something we need to take accountability for and be more conscious of.
All right. Well, since I can't see what's happening out there, thanks for having us, and thanks to all of my awesome partners and panelists today. And I think feel free to reach out to any one of us if you want more information or want to hear more about the companies or the initiative. Have a good rest of the Friday afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.